Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I wanted to talk about how I shoot sport photos because I often get asked. People see my stuff. Photographers want to know how I create the images I do, what settings I use, what cameras I use, etc., etc., etc. Because that's what our photographers want. That's what we always ask. Or what did you shoot that on? And all that crap, rather than saying, how did you create the image? It's all gear and settings. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk about my settings, basically, that I use to create two different styles of images. The first style of images is an action shot, which is an example of this. And the way I do that kind of stuff usually works on kind of one, just for me, is for one way. And basically what I use on my camera is the custom functions. So on a Canon camera, I'm not sure about Nikon or Sony, on a Canon camera, you've got C1, C2, C3. Woo! And what these allow you to do is they allow you to preset settings onto the camera on the dial so that you know exactly what they're going to be when you turn them on. So say, for example, you're shooting in aperture priority mode and you know you want to shoot at f4, for example, or 5.6, but you also know you want a certain white balance all the time and you want a certain shutter speed all the time, etc., etc., etc. Rather than kind of shooting in aperture priority mode and hoping you kind of get there and all that kind of stuff, what you can do is you can use a custom function to set up and preset certain bits and pieces. So if for example, for me, I know I want to shoot action stills at least 1,000th of a second, around about f4 if I can get it, without too much ISO, but I don't really want to think about the ISO either. So I have that set into a custom function, and it's set for C2. And what that does is that sets what does it set? So if I'm outdoors, for outdoor sports, it sets a cloudy white balance because I like my images a little bit warmer. I tend to find that, especially with trail running type stuff, mountain type running things that I do, a daylight white balance usually creates quite blue greens and stuff, which I don't like. So I put that to cloudy or shade, depending on how bad it is, and that usually sorts the problem out. I run on auto ISO because I don't really want to think about it. What I have set my custom functions up to do is allow me to basically go, that's the image I want to take, click. I don't want to think about shutter speed, I don't want to think about aperture, I don't want to think about ISO, I want to think about composition, where I'm focusing. I want to think about kind of the context that athlete's in for that shot, and I just want to focus on what I'm creating, not what settings I'm at. So auto ISO, and I've limited that on my 7D Mark II to make sure that sits anywhere between 100 ISO and 6400 ISO. Any higher than that, and especially in lower light conditions, my 7D Mark II gets a bit noisy, so I tend to kind of limit that. I also have the minimum shutter speed set to 1,000th of a second. That means no matter what I'm shooting, I can freeze that action. If I'm in somewhere particularly dark or a bit nasty, I'll drop that to maybe 500ths of a second, just to make sure that I've got a little bit of leeway and a little bit of extra light, but I usually just adjust that as and when I need. But I know basically with that custom function for action sports, I can flick it into that custom function, start shooting, and I know right away that I'm going to get those images that I want, and those kind of frozen still images that I want. The other example and the other custom function setting I use quite a lot is what I call my C1 function, and that allows me to create stuff like this. Now these motion pans are a bit different. It's something that I wouldn't say I specialize in, but it's something that I definitely love. It's something that I try to bring to the sports that I work on because I think it shows a bit of motion and it shows a little bit of creativity, and I like that. They're those, for me, motion pan stuff is that stuff that you look at and you go, wow, that looks really cool, straight on the back of the camera as soon as you see it. So my C1 custom function is set to that, and it's set to shutter priority mode, basically, to a 50th of a second, and I then let the aperture just basically roam. So if the camera thinks that the aperture, in order to balance that light level off at a 50th of a second, needs to be F4, then it'll do it. If it thinks it needs to be F16, it'll do it. For motion panning, for me, doesn't really make a much difference what that aperture is. As long as I can move and create that motion, usually the depth of field at that point don't matter. Again, auto ISO up to 6400 because I just would rather let the camera figure all that stuff out. These things, guys, are really clever, way, way cleverer than you think, and they're much faster than you can think and you can process. So allow them to do a little bit of the work, and that's absolutely fine. From that 50th of a second, for me, that's a benchmark, and I'll usually start at that point, and then I will go lower and lower and lower and lower, and I can do that as I normally would control shutter on the dials. So I can basically dial down to anywhere down to a 10th of a second or a 13th of a second if I want to, but I know every time I flick that mode on, I'm going to be at a base of 1/50 of a second, auto ISO, and let my aperture roam basically to what I need. And those two settings are the core that I use all the time. I won't shoot in manual when I do sports. I will shoot manual if I'm doing commercial stuff and I'm in control of the light and I know what I can be doing. There's a time and a place for it. But for me, for speed, for efficiency, I want to be able to see an image basically unfolding in front of me and be able to take that image. I use the two custom functions to do that. So one's basically an aperture priority mode, which is all set and geared to very high shutter speeds that freezes at action but still gives me a lovely depth of field. And then the other one is set basically to a shutter priority mode, which just allows me to not to freeze that action, but to move with that player or that athlete or that rider, whatever it might be, and create that motion blur. And that one very much is a jump off point for me because invariably I will go lower. I'll be down at, I don't know, 10th, 13th of a second normally once I've got in my groove. I do a bit of pre-focusing. I'm always on auto focus on my camera, but I will pre-focus stuff. Especially if I'm motion panning, I'll pre-focus to the point where I want to work, where I want that image to start working, and I'll pan through it and then I'll start shooting as soon as I get to that point. But yeah, that's basically how I do it. But there's no right or wrong, and the trick with sports is to find what works for you best. If you're creating images that you love, ultimately that's all that matters, but that's how I do it. So it's a really quick rundown of my modes and what I do. I don't really want the channel to be full of this is how I shoot this and this is how I shoot that, but it will be from time to time. So I kind of hope this has helped really. If there's any questions you want to ask, just chuck a question in the comments or drop me a DM or something and I'll answer those. I'm quite happy to do that. But yeah, definitely look at custom functions if you have them on your camera. It just helps with speed and efficiency really for me. Have a wicked day. Go out and take some wicked photos and tag me online on social, and I'd love to see them. Have a wicked day. Peace.